So as many of you know, I have a series on this channel where I go through a set and review every card in it, and once I finish the Invasion of Chaos one for my anniversary, the next one we'll be covering will be Legacy of Darkness, which is not only one of the best DM sets, but the first to feature an alternative monster subtype that isn't complete garbage in the form of the Spirit subtype. A series of monsters of various types and attributes, spirits have two things in common. Firstly, they can be special summoned, and secondly, they all bounce themselves back to your hand during the end phase. Sold on them yet? Yeah, I know this makes them sound awful. However, in the early Yu-Gi-Oh especially, several of them saw play in various decks. This is because to balance these two massive downsides, Konami gifted many of these cards with some of the best abilities in early Yu-Gi-Oh! From repeatable Book of Moons to bow wipes in a can, to multiple attacks, to even drawing 5, or making the opponent discard their whole hand, spirits may not be around for long, but if they resolve, you'll likely have a very good time. So that in mind, I began to wonder if a deck focused on these cards would be viable in GOAT format, the slowest format with the lowest power level currently seeing play in Yu-Gi-Oh! And turns out, yes, very much so. In fact, a couple of years ago, a Spirit deck came second at a massive GOAT event, played by a player named Serenity. Now while this deck is a couple of years old, many of the decks it was designed to beat are still relevant in GOAT, so I thought, why not take a look at this deck today, along with a few options you could also play. This is GOAT Spirits. Also, if anyone's interested, I've linked an interview the innovator of this deck did for GoatFormat.com if you want to hear more about their takes on this deck. Link in the description. Okay, now on to the video. So let's begin this look at the Spirits deck by going over which of our friends in the afterlife we'll be playing. After all, there were only 11 Spirits in the game at the time, so it's not like we have much to work with here. Now the best Spirit card made at the time was of course Yatagarasu, which was banned, so that's out. Next we have the two tribute monsters in Hinokakusuchi and Yamasa Dragon, that are both massive beaters and can either empty the opponent's hand or let you draw 5 cards. Now this sounds great, but them being two tributes that only stick on the board for one turn with no protection is such a bad use of resources that even these busted effects can make up for it in a slower grindy deck like what we're trying to make here. Naba White Rabbit is a direct attacker with 700 points, and while it isn't the best spirit monster, it does make the best use out of the spirit downside, as it can get in for damage every single turn, and the opponent needs to either use a trap card or some form of hand destruction to get rid of it, or so them keep poking them to death because they can't hit it in battle while it's back in your hand. So not a good card for the main deck, but something you could possibly play in the side deck for time, I suppose. We also have Otohime, a decent monster with a position change effect but low stats. Mashahari, another decent defender that upon flip or summon lets you scry, and Fushi no Tori, which can gain you life points in time, but is a bit too weak to see much play. And there's also the Great Long Nose, which can be a threatening role when it connects with the opponent, but like Yamasa Dragon and Hinokazuchi, he's a tribute monster, so he's also out unfortunately. The first spirit we absolutely need in this deck is Tsukiyomi. A level 4 spellcaster, this card is not only the best legal spirit in Yu-Gi-Oh! At this time, but was also a major staple in GOAT format outside of this deck. That's because throwing this card acts as a repeatable Book of Moon, flipping a monster face down so they can do each turn as it bounces back to your hand at the end phase like all other spirits. Now in other GOAT decks, this card can be used on both your own cards and your opponents to both trigger your flip effects multiple times and make monsters easy to run over if they've got low defense points, which by the way is why Monarchs can't be tier 1 in GOAT sadly. In this deck however, we are mostly using this card as a piece of interaction to beat over opposing monsters as we rarely have flips on our field. Now this does make this card less versatile, however in a meta full of big beaters with low defense stats like Sunbite of the Dark and Goblin Attack Force, this card can still be a source of multiple monsters being destroyed all by herself. In addition to this, we can even make her stronger by in the old GOAT format staples of Thousand Eyes Restrict, Scapegoat and Metamorphosis. Once the best combo in GOAT format, activating Scapegoat and then using one of the tokens to make a Thousand Eyes Restrict with Metamorphosis is still pretty powerful, and when combined with Tsukiyomi we now have a combo that can remove 2 monsters a turn while also locking the opponent out of both attacking and changing their monster positions. Now yes, in modern GOAT where most decks are running 3 Gravekeeper's Spy and possibly a Guard, this effect is a lot worse than it used to be, but trust me, that won't be an issue for this deck, as it's built to run over 9% of beaters in this format, more than makes up for this, and that's why she's the best spirit in our deck. Up next, we're in the best beater in the deck, the 2k attack 4-star behemoth known as Suicide Soldier. Now on the surface this card looks awful, as all it is a big beater with massive downside of having any damage it deals. And yes, all this is true. So I play this seemingly shit card, you ask? Well, firstly, it's not like we've got many better options in spirits, but seriously, it's because, surprisingly, this is one of the biggest level 4 beaters we can run that will always be above 2k attack points. Okay, that sounds weird, let me explain. Yes, Goblin Attack Force, Blade Knight and Zombie of the Dark are good beaters that can in certain conditions be 2k plus beaters for no tribute. But even though two of them have more base power than Soldier, they won't for very long, as Zombie drops below Soldier's attack after its first battle, and Goblin Attack Force is stuck in defense position after one attack, making it an easy card to run over as it has no defense points for 2 turns. Finally, while Blade Knight can on occasion match this card in battle, your opponent needs to be down to a maximum of 1 card in their hand to do this, but we can keep our hand nice and full with our bounce spirits and removal cards, and still benefit from this card's massive stats. So compared to that, this card's half damage downside doesn't seem that bad, does it? Especially in a deck like ours that isn't trying to win quickly anyway, making this another 3 in this deck. And side note, yes, I'm aware Berserk Gorilla has the same attack points plus for downside, so don't bother pointing that out. And wrapping up our Spirit Trilogy, we have the bane of all Go Control players' existence in a Soda Priest. Another big beater is under attack points. This card can attack each monster on the field once each. Like I said, this card was a nightmare in Goat, back when Go Control was thought to be the best deck, as it could take out an entire field of goats quicker than a famine with anger issues. And even though the deck's popularity has waned over the years, this card can still do a lot of work today versus certain decks. For example, this card will drop up most of utility cards played in Chaos Control decks, as they usually have low stats to compensate for their powerful effects. And yes, attacking into a bunch of defense position monsters against Chaos Control will give them a bunch of effects themselves, but we play so much removal in this deck we can afford to give them a couple extra cards. In addition to this card has nice synergy with Tsukiyomi and Book of Moon, as she can take out almost any goat monster in defense, not named Greenkeeper's Spy, including staples like Tribe, Breaker, Jinzo and more, not to mention the fact that the majority of Warrior Toolbox decks fall to this. This not only makes it easy to land right attacks with other monsters, but also allows you to save your removal cards for threats we can't beat in battle, most notably the aforementioned Gravekeeper cards and the Chaos Boss monsters. However, what this card is best at is helping us in the grind. As we'll see soon, this deck's main goal is to force our opponent to play on the same level as us, aka with at most 1 monster on the field at any given time, so we can win in a grindy game by having all of our best cards return to the hand safely. And to do this, we play a far greater amount of 1/4 removal compared to most other decks in this format. So a card like this that can remove multiple opposing monsters without having to spend a non-recurring resource is invaluable in winning in the grind, which we're usually trying to do. And that is the 9 spirit monsters that make up the main engine of this deck, providing us with interaction, removal and raw damage. However, as pushed as these cards are, let's be honest here, we can't expect a deck which almost never has a monster on the field to be competitive no matter how much removal we run. As such, we do need to run some other mortal bodies that will stick around when our turn is done while these dead cards do their thing. First up, as we're playing a heavy removal based control deck, we may as well play some goat staples that are also good at removing things, in Breaker the Magical Warrior, DD Warrior Lady and Tribe Infecting Virus. A spell counter with 1600 base attack points, Breaker is a toolbox on a stick, as when he enters he gets a spell counter which can either be left on him to boost him to 1900 points, or be removed to make him an MST on legs. So depending on the scenario, this card can either be the biggest beater we have that sticks to the board, or an answer to problematic pieces of back row, particularly the stall floodgates like Gravity Bind, something our deck often struggles with outing. Now Virus, on the other hand, used to be one of the most powerful and feared cards in all of Yugioh back when Goat was a lot slower. A 600 point water, this pandemic with legs, for the cost of a discard could let you pick one type and destroy all cards in the field of that same type. This was not once per turn and could just be a one-sided board wipe if played correctly. Now this card has fallen a little bit out of favour in recent years, because some decks don't want to pay that kind of discard or are too fast for it, but in this deck we're trying to play a slow game and have multiple cards bouncing back to our hands to keep refilling it. This card can just be insane. And finally for this section we have DD Warrior Lady. The card MBT showed can solo many modern day cards, and in this deck she's both a solid piece of removal in general and an out to cards we really don't want in the graveyard. Most notably Chaos attribute monsters that can be used to summon BLS and Chaos Sork, or cards that we really don't want to have once to revive with Premature Burial or Call of the Haunted, because if we can't make use of those cards, neither can our opponent. In addition to this, she's one of the only good cards we can set in this deck, and if hit by something big, she can basically permanently remove a big threat from the game. Next we play a card you usually wouldn't expect to see in a control deck. It's Mataza the Zapper. A 1300 attack warrior, not only can this card's controller not change, making him immune to Slash Steal and Brain Control, but he can also make 2 attacks in a turn. Now in the Warrior and Chaos Warrior decks this guy is usually found in, his job is to remove flip monsters and other weak cards, and while he can still do that well in this deck, particularly in combination with Yugioh, what he's here for is to quickly end the game. Like I said earlier, this deck's main goal is to use a combination of spirit monsters and 3 Saw movies worth of traps to leave our opponent with no monsters in play, and in that scenario this card is the highest damaging normal summoning goat, as with its 2 attacks per turn, that's whopping 2600 points of direct damage a turn, making him a 4-turn clock by himself. Sangan has also played his way of searching Mataza, Tsukiyomi, Warrior Lady and other cards, and that's it for our core lineup, with the rest being 1 or 2 anti-meta cards which will be determined by your local meta. For example, one unique choice in the Serenity build of this deck was a copy of DD Crazy Beast, which can banish any monster it destroys, which along with cards like Kaiku can be a great shout in a meta full of chaos, whereas if you're facing down more Warrior and other aggro decks, you may be better suited with a couple of defenders like Big Shield Gardener and Gravekeeper's Spy. Honestly, this part of the deck is completely customizable, it's up to you guys to pick these 1 or 2 extra slots. Now as you can see, we're playing a bunch of cards in this deck that bounce themselves back to your hand each turn. As such, the first spell I'm going to recommend for this deck is one to take advantage of this in Creature Swap. A normal spell, this card pretty much does what it says on the tin. It makes each player pick a monster and swap them with the opponents. Now I mentioned in my first ever video how this can be used with recruiters to essentially get a better snatch steal effect, as you're taking an opponent's monster for a card that will provide you with the benefit of being on the opponent's field, and that's very much the case here, as any spirit you give your opponent will come right back to your hand during the end phase, leaving us with an extra body sticking around, our opponent down a monster, which if we're playing this deck right will be their only one, and a removal card unused for another threat. Now granted, as common as this was, the original innovator of this deck wasn't actually playing this card, preferring instead to rely on the Scapegoat Metamorphosis combo from Goat Control to steal monsters with Thousand Eyes Restrict, and to be honest, with the blanket Spellbinding Circle Effect Restrict offers, I can see their reasoning. So basically for this slot we should pick one or the other, or even both, if you wish, as Scapegoat does combo well with Swap, and since the original deck was made, the Gravekeeper engine has become more prominent in Goat. We may need more cards to out monsters spirits can't beat in battle. We next have No Man of Crossout, which can destroy any face-down monster and banish any of the copies of that card if it's a flip monster. So again, like I said, we struggle with Gravekeeper's Spy, and this card alone can take care of that card for good, destroy not only the copy that would be set, but any copies in the deck. In addition to this card also helps us against the 2 decks we're designed to beat, namely Goat Control and Chaos, as it can take out cards like Magician of Faith, Magical Merchant, and other staples those 2 decks play. And wrapping up our spell base, we got some staples in the form of Heavy Storm, Declare Backroad to help us keep the opponent's field clear for our spirits to go in directly, and of course the infamous Trinity, Graceful Charity, Delinquent Duo and Pot of Greed. Now Pot of Greed is self-explanatory as it gives us more cards. However, Graceful Charity is a bit worse in this deck as we have Phallus cards that benefit off its discard effect, but still, seeing 3 more cards in this deck can be really good if you want to filter out multiple spirits that are clogging your hand for more pieces of removal. And finally, of course, Duo is here to do what it always does, be obnoxious, by taking 2 cards out of the opponent's hand, making it far more difficult for them to fight us in a grindy game that we're trying to put them in. Also, side note, spirits are a great counter to Duo, as any excess copies bounce back to your hand can just be discarded for the Duo at no cost to yourself. And of course, to complement our Thousand Eyes Restrict and Creature Swaps, we have a Snatch Steal for another way to take opponent's most powerful monsters to give us a field when our spirits bounce to our hand. So we have a deck that more often than not will leave you with an empty or close to empty field, meaning yes, we're often vulnerable to quick deaths and direct attacks. Even a format as slow as Goat has big threats like Goblin Attack Force, the Monarchs, and the Chaos Monsters can still be 4-turn clocks on an open field, among other staples like Breaker and Kaiku that can do the same on 5 turns. Now yes, a few of these cards we want to keep alive, to either steal or assimilate, but most have gotta go. As such, our trap lineup is exclusively aimed at doing one thing: killing as many monsters as we can. No jars, no hand attack, just kill, kill, kill for the most part. Starting off, we've got a format staple in Mirror Force, which blasts away all attack position monsters when you're attacked. Now this card is played in almost every non-burn deck in Goat, as it's one of the few bullwebs we have access to in this format. However, we can even make better use of it than most other decks. Now in past videos I've often talked about the psychological effects this card can have on Goat players, and that it's a blowout effect that usually experienced players play around by only having one monster in attack position at any time. So that if this card is flipped, it will just be a 1-for-1 removal card as opposed to a full field nuke. And if they do that here, it's still good for us as Spirit players, as our goal is to out-resource the opponent and minimise damage. However, what also may happen is that with a clear field, many players might get overconfident and attack with multiple monsters, thus giving us a sweet 2, 3 or more for 1. I know most veteran players won't fall for this, but hey, a man can dream, right? Next we've got another Goat staple in Torrential Tribute. A normal trap, this card simply wipes all monsters on the field when a monster is summoned. Now with Darkhold and Regeki banned in this format, this is by far the best bullwhip we've got access to in Goat, and unlike Mirror Force, this card's a lot harder to play around for a 1-for-1 trade, as there are very few decks in Yu-Gi-Oh that can win with only one summon, that aren't ours of course. What this means is that along with the Sura Priest and possibly Mirror Force, this card will be one of our best ways to deal with multiple cards at the same time and grinding out our opponent's resources to nothing. And with our cards going back to our hand every turn, we're likely to lose almost nothing when we play this card, making this arguably the best trap in the deck. Moving away from our bullwebs to our 1-for-1 removal cards, we begin with another Goat staple in Ring of Destruction. A normal trap, this card can destroy any monster on the field and inflict damage to both players equal to that monster's attack points. Now yes, this isn't as good as Torrential and Mirror Force for clearing fields, but does have some perks that bullwebs do not. 1, it's more open when you can activate it, as you can play this card at any point to destroy a monster. 2, it's good at finishing and clearing a board with the Sura Priest, as it can destroy a card the Priest cannot, like for example Gravekeeper's Spy. And 3, of course, is the damage it can do to the opponent, which can be a game ender in the right circumstances. Complementing our Ring of Destruction, we next have Bottomless Trap Hole and surprisingly regular Trap Hole as well. Now Bottomless is kind of self-explanatory, as it can destroy any special summon monster for 200 or more attack points and then banish it. This can take out Chaos Boss monsters, can prevent them from being summoned in the first place by banishing the material, and can take out most other high power Goat format monsters. Trap Hole, on the other hand, can only destroy normal summoned monsters with 1000 or less attack points, which usually is too bad for Goat format, but in this case when playing so much removal that can reduce our opponent to summoning one monster a turn, this can essentially take out almost any monster our opponent can summon other than a Chaos monster. And continuing this deck's theme of playing weaker versions of staples along with the staples for more removal, we finish our removal suite with 3 Sakuretsu Armor and 2 Widespread Ruin. Now Sakuretsu Armor admittedly hasn't seen as much play recently as it used to, but it's still a pretty powerful card as it can destroy any attacking monster. Widespread Ruin, on the other hand, also triggers an attack, however it only destroys the biggest monster on the field, essentially being a Fissure in trap form. Again, both these cards here for the same reason, to destroy as many monsters as we can to reduce our opponent's resources. And both of them do that job very well, with Sakuretsu in particular being really good at destroying big threats like BLS, when our opponent is less scared to attack with them because our field is clear. Finally, we have Magic Cylinder, a battle trap that won't remove the opposing monsters, but will instead reflect one of their attacks back to the opponent as damage, which yes, for this deck isn't as useful as it doesn't help us keep our opponent to the 1 monster max. However, it can help us in closing games out, something we may struggle with if we're playing with only 1 spirit at a time. I should also point out that even though I said we weren't running jars or anything like that, you can do if you wish, if you want to see more cards, try to get a balance of spirits and trap cards. I chose not to give this deck at 40 cards, but again you can do if you want to get more variety in your hands. In conclusion, Spirits is one of the more interesting brews we've seen in Go format for the last few years, and can give two of the best decks in Chaos and Go Control Headaches. Now yes, it's true with the way the Go's developed over the last few years, it's become less effective than it was in 2020 when this version was made. However, with a few tweaks it can still stand up there with the likes of Chaos, Warrior and Go Control. Definitely a fun list to try out, and I hope you guys will give it a shot. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.